Today's episode is sponsored by the City of Dublin's Division of Economic Development. The City of Dublin provides world-class, tailored business services and resources to ensure the best possible environment for businesses to recruit talent and thrive. Because of this strategic focus and commitment to employer growth, Dublin is the only accredited economic development organization in the state of Ohio. The City of Dublin supports startups and entrepreneurs by offering targeted resources and training programs to grow companies that are financially sustainable, innovative, and committed to creating jobs. Learn how other businesses depend on Dublin. Visit thriveindublinohio.com. 614 Startups Nation, welcome to another episode of the 614 Startups Podcast. Listen, man, this guest is far too long. We recorded an original podcast. This is a little bit of behind the scenes. The audio didn't come out so good, so we needed to reschedule. But this is a busy guy. You just can't reschedule this man on the fly. I have my very special guest, Mr. Marques Martin of FVLCRUM in the building. Marques, welcome to the show.
Oh, Elil, glad to be here. Glad to redo it, and always will make time for you. So I appreciate the opportunity.
I appreciate that, man, and thank you so much for your understanding. The last time we talked about a lot of great topics, and I think there's no better time than to talk about private equity, given where the Columbus startup ecosystem is. FVLCRUM is a private equity firm. You represent that firm very well, and it's always great to have new firms in the community educating founders, investors alike about your world. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of that, we got to get to know you first. So who is Marques Martin, and how do you come to be in Columbus, Ohio?
Well, who is Marques Thornton? It's a great question. I think I'm always figuring it out day by day. Who am I? But at my core, I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. So Columbus is home to me. I love the 614. I went to Columbus Public City Schools most of my childhood. And I just moved back with my family last July. So we've been in Columbus now for a little over a year. And it's been great. I mean, the city has grown immensely. And quite candidly, at FVLCRUM, we want to be a part of that growth and help grow the private equity market. But, so after my childhood, being raised in Columbus, I went off to college in Atlanta, Georgia, to Morehouse College, and I was a finance major there, and that kind of started me on my journey that's got me to where I am today. I always knew growing up that I wanted to be in finance. I used to count money on Saturday mornings. I watched X-Men and count money. That's what I did every Saturday when I wasn't playing football. And so went to Morehouse. I did an internship in consulting, and I did an internship in investment banking up in New York on Wall Street, and decided that I wanted to be a consultant first. And after a couple of years of being a consultant post graduation in Atlanta, I then got my first job in private equity. I worked at a firm called HIG. We were doing growth equity investments. And then from there, I moved to Cleveland in 2008, and I joined the Riverside Company. And that's when I started doing buyouts, which is what I do today, of lower middle market. I worked there for several years, and that's when I started to get the itch to want to be an entrepreneur myself. We were writing these big checks to founders, and I was trying to figure out, how do I get in on that? It seems like they don't necessarily always have the pedigree that you hear you need to have, but they were out there and they were doing it, and that seemed really exciting to me. And so then I left private equity temporarily to go become an operator, and I actually ran KeyBank's small business division up in Cleveland, Ohio, but I controlled their national small business. So that's 13 states, at a $4 billion balance sheet. And then my partner and I, we decided to leave our respective jobs, and we launched the Inkwell Group. And we were investing in lower middle market companies with diversity as a key value driver for us, diversity at the leadership levels and at the board. And that helped leverage us into what is now FVLCRUM. And now we're just doing it at a much larger scale. But it's just been really exciting. And like I said, I felt the opportunity to come back home to Columbus, where my heart has always been. And I think that there's a real opportunity to grow the private equity presence in this city.
Yeah, man. And so many kind of serendipitous crossovers in our lives, right? So I'm not originally from Columbus, but definitely a product of Columbus City Schools. So I went to Ridge. Where'd you go to school?
I went to Independence. My brother went to
Independence.
Ridge.
All right. All
Yeah.
right. So a little rivalry there if we
Yeah.
want to take it back to high school. And then you mentioned working in Key Bank. Early in my career, I was working in the banking industry. So I worked for Key Bank at the branch level. So a little serendipity there. But I think the thing that you didn't mention was kind of part of the influence of you coming back home to Columbus is taking care of aging parents, right?
Yes.
I know the first time that we spoke, you mentioned the fact that part of that move was because, you needed to care for an aging parent. And I have my dad is in his 80s. Fortunately, he's able to manage on his own. So I kind of share that concern, right? At any moment that phone could ring and you need to be there for a parent. So I appreciate you sharing a little bit about your background and how you got into private equity. But I do need to segue a little bit, man, because every Morehouse man I meet, there's somewhat of an excellence thing going on with them, right? So what is in the water at Morehouse that you think breeds men who are ambitious, who are community-minded, and who are focused on really solving big problems?
Man, I'll tell you, I didn't know what Morehouse was when I was living here in Columbus. And there was a woman who I've since reconnected with since I moved back to Columbus named Catherine Willis, who one day looked at me and said, Marques, I think you would be a Morehouse man. And I kind of give her the side eye. I'm like, I don't know what that means. And lo and behold, that day, it changed my life, right? So she connected me with a couple of Morehouse alums that were living in the city, including one who graduated with Martin Luther King back in 1948. And that was just an amazing experience for me to meet somebody like that. And then, as fate would have it, I got a scholarship from Coca-Cola that flew me down to Atlanta in April of my senior year for a scholarship weekend. And I went over, and that's when I first visited Morehouse. And when I got to Morehouse, every other college that recruited me, whether it was for football or academics, they always told me about, here's some alum who's old and who made it right in life. And Morehouse introduced me to a kid who was a couple years older than me, but looked like me, and was getting ready to go make $10,000 over the summer working at this place called Wall Street. And from that point, I was sold. I said, they got people who look like me, who've been through backgrounds like me, and they're doing things now versus, every college should have at least one person. So then when you get to Morehouse, what you realize is, even though we're a historically Black college and we're all male, everybody had diverse backgrounds. Everybody was coming. Some people were rich, some people were poor, some people were international, some people were domestic, but we all were focused on being the best that we could be. And then the school just kind of drills it in you, being the best doctor, being the best pastor, being the best business person, and then expecting you to be a leader. We took classes around leadership. We had a weekly convocation that you had to show up where they would bring in speakers from all over the world to talk to us. So it gets ingrained in you from the moment you step on the red clay hill that if you come to Morehouse, you are destined to do great things in whatever field that you want to do. Now it's up to you if you want to go reach for that crown, right? But if you want to reach for it, it's there to be had. And what I appreciated about that is you never had to feel weird about saying, this is my dream. This is what I want to go do. You don't have to wonder, is somebody going to look at you like, you're dreaming too big. Why are you doing that? They're going to be like, oh, that's what's up. Let me know how I can help you. And I think that's huge. And I think a lot of HBCUs try to do that for their student base. But I just think Morehouse is in a special tier, a special class that only a handful of other schools can really match. So that's what it was for me. And it absolutely changed my life.
Yeah, man, that environment piece, I think, we all understand it kind of, hey, and we take it sometimes for granted of how powerful the right environment, the right crew, the right people, the right mentors, the right teachers can really shape you and expand you and really set expectations that are beyond maybe some of the limitations that we all sometimes put on ourselves. And that's really what I want for the Columbus startup ecosystem, right? To create this environment of people who are really focused on doing big things, connecting them and saying, hey, it's possible for Columbus to dream bigger. You know, we don't have to go to the coast to find inspiration. We can find it right here at home. With that said, though, you're bringing some new flavor to the city that I really like, this idea of private equity. We've been obsessed with VC, in my personal opinion, but is there room for a different asset class, right? A different way of raising capital for your business. So I want to get into the fundamentals. What is private equity?
Well, that's a great question and a great observation. And I know there is room, and there absolutely needs to be participation across the capital spectrum, from early stage angels, venture capital, all the way to later stage private equity buyouts and whatnot. But if we just want to get into kind of simple definitions, right? Private equity is using private capital to generally do control investments across a myriad of industries, right? And we're typically investing in established companies who have had positive cash flows for multiple years. Whereas venture capital, they tend not to take control positions. They tend to take minority positions. And those companies generally haven't become profitable yet, right? They're growing, or they need the capital to grow more, but you're still betting that they're going to have a sustainable business model. Whereas on the private equity side, we aren't making the bet that the model is sustainable. We're making a bet that we can kind of take a good company and make it better, right? And then that's kind of a fundamental difference. So our risk profile tends to be, or I should say our risk tolerance tends to be a little bit lower than venture capital. The other thing that is a key differentiator is we will oftentimes use debt as part of our transactions, whereas venture capital won't do that more often than not. Obviously, there are exceptions to every rule, but the reason we can use debt and they can't is because our companies already have positive cash flow to begin with. So they actually have money to pay the debt back. Venture capital, that would probably restrict the balance sheet of that company and prohibit it from being able to achieve the growth goals that they need. So at its highest level, that's kind of the key difference.
So whereas, you know, it feels like startups who are seeking venture capital, they have to go out and date the VC. It feels like the opposite is true here, right? Because it's more like the private equity companies need to go out and date these prospective companies that they want to invest in. Am I reading that right? Because somebody who is profitable, multiple years of profitability, may not necessarily be thinking about capital, particularly debt, right, as a way of maybe taking them to the next level. Maybe they think in another way of bootstrapping to the next level. Is that the dynamic that you find in private equity?
100%, right? And so when somebody's willing to sell the majority of their business that's been making them money, it generally falls into a couple of buckets, right? One, they are an older founder, and this represents one of their largest assets, if not the largest asset that they have, but it's highly illiquid. And so now they want to monetize, right, some of that value and start to diversify their own personal portfolio. Two, they reach a point where they know that there's another level for them to get to, but they don't know how to get there on their own, right? And so what separates a good private equity firm from somebody who's just money is we bring more than just money to the table. We have operating resources. We have relationships that we can introduce. They're going to help them open up doors that they didn't have open previously. And we have to be able to market that to these companies so that they choose us versus somebody else. Because you're right, it's easy to get the money. It's harder to actually find a partner who you kind of jive with culturally. And then, you know, you can see that partner helping you take 20% of a much larger pie versus having 100% of a smaller pie, right? Like that's what you're trying to buy into, that second bite of the apple is going to be even bigger than the first bite of the apple when you sold. And we have to be able to deliver that value. That's what our shareholders want. or LPs. And that's what the sellers ultimately want too.
All right. So not all private equity is created the same, just like not all businesses, not all startups, and not all VCs are created the same. I wanted to get into the mission of Fulcrum. So, the company, the why for your existence, and what's your thesis as you go out into the market and look for companies to invest in?
Yeah. So fundamentally, what I love about Fulcrum, what we're doing is we are using an incredible asset class, which is private equity. And we are addressing what we believe is the country's largest problem, but it's certainly a top 5 problem in this country, which is the racial wealth gap, which from that racial wealth gap, all kind of other problems exist or they permeate, right? Whether it's health-ish outcomes, education outcomes, and social injustice outcomes, like all of those things, I think a lot of that could be solved if there was more economic power in the communities that are most impacted, which tend to be minority communities. So at Fulcrum, our mandate is we are investing exclusively in minority-owned and led companies from a private equity standpoint. And we're doing that in healthcare, business services, and government contracting companies. And even if a company is not minority owned when we first buy it, we're then partnering with minority executives, giving them or having them earn significant equity so that the minorities are always at least the second largest shareholder behind our money. If not, they have more of the company than we do. And our goal is to generate $10 million of what we call new net worth for those minorities, because we believe that number is transformative. It starts creating generational wealth, and it starts allowing us to address issues that affect us, right? And it's not to say that we don't need our non-minority partners. We absolutely do, right? They are a big part of what we do. But I'm not mad when a non-minority doesn't give their time or their money to a minority cause, because people give to what touches their heart or what their experience is. So at a very simple level, if we expect to address minority issues, we need to have more minorities with influence and the ability to actually put money behind causes. And so that's what I really love about Fulcrum and what we're doing.
All right, listen, folks, you're getting the 101 from my man, Marques Martin of Fulcrum. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to get into the mechanics, the nitty gritty. Now we know the mission. We got to go about how to execute on that mission. All right. So hang out with us. We'll be right back after these messages. This episode is brought to you by Rev1. Rev1's mission is to help entrepreneurs build great companies. As you navigate the waters of business entrepreneurship, you don't have to go it alone. A strategic partnership with Rev1 connects innovators to the talent, customers, space, and funding you need when you need it. Get started with Rev1 Startup Studio by visiting rev1ventures.com to learn more. Again, the website is rev1ventures.com. This episode is brought to you by KJK. Tired of the billable hour? KJK has a solution. The KJK GC Advantage program offers businesses comprehensive legal services in the areas of employment, corporate services, real estate, trademark, intellectual property, and estate planning, all for a set monthly fee. KJK serves as their clients' partners in business, not just their lawyers. Along with cost certainty and predictability, the KJK GC Advantage program gives clients peace of mind, knowing their projects will be handled quickly and efficiently, maximizing the return on investment on their legal spend. So don't go it alone, let KJK help. Learn more by visiting kjk.com. 614 Startups Nation, welcome back to my conversation with Marques Martin of Fulcrum. All right, Marques, you gave us some definitions to work with and then the mission of Fulcrum. I want to dig into that mission a little bit more now that we know you're focused on minority business owners, and we know typically with private equity, they have an established business, they're making money, and they've been doing so over a period of years. So as you look out the market in general, I'm going to throw you here to it's not to put you on the spot, but it's really about understanding the market. As you think about Black-owned businesses, businesses that are ready on day one right now to take on private equity using the definition that you used, what are we looking at in terms of business in the United States?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we always get pushback from folks who don't believe there are enough companies out there. And it's the number one kind of question, if you will, that we come across out on the trail. Well, we tell people, and we've done the work, the market just for minority-led companies in this country is $3 trillion. So it ain't small, right? Now, that runs the gambit, from large to small to, there's a lot of one-person, single employee type companies that make up that number. But there's a lot of companies that are, can be invested in. The challenge has been, and this has been an advantage for us, they're not connected to the capital markets in the same way that non-minority companies are. And there's probably a lot of reasons why that is, right? There's a trust issue. There's hey, we didn't go to the same schools. We didn't grow up in the same neighborhoods. We weren't part of the same country clubs. You name it, right? There's any number of reasons, without even getting into all the historical issues that our country has had, right? That has created challenges and barriers for people of color to become business owners and thrive and et cetera. So what we've done is we've said, hey, we've been at this for 10 years or so now. We've been building relationships with the Ethnic Chamber of Commerce. We've been building relationships with minority supplier organizations. We've been building relationships with bankers and lawyers and local companies. And so we oftentimes become a first call when somebody's thinking about selling, right? And because they don't know where else to go. There's not an investment banker ready to take their call or anything like that because they've never called into them. And then the other thing I would just say is when you think about what we're doing over the next 3 years, we will invest in 10 to 12 platform companies. If you don't believe that there are at least 10 to 12 investable minority-led companies in this country, then, I honestly don't have any words for you because I feel like you think so poorly of the minority business community that we can't see eye to eye. We know that the opportunity exists and we're seeing it. Our pipeline right now is almost $500 million worth in transaction value, all proprietary with the exception, I think, like one deal, all minority-led companies, right? So the deals are there to be had. It takes people willing to put in the work to find them, connect with them, and get them across the finish line.
Sometimes in healthcare, you have the triple aim, right? So you want to provide great care, you want to have great patient satisfaction, and you want to do it at low cost, right? So those triple aims, like this, it's the same thing when I listen to conversations like this. But what's the triple aim of 614 Startup? So number one is to create great content. It's to gain some exposure for the Columbus startup community. But the aim that might be missing is to highlight some of these things that persist as myths, right? So the myth of where are all the Black businesses? I think it's also you got to have great PR as well, right? So if everything that we all hear on the news is about all the negatives, but we don't hear an equal kind of or counterbalance of, oh, this great business that just had an exit or this great founder who's been around. I mean, if you think of one company in Columbus, Ohio, it's E.E. Ward, right? They do a great job of telling you they've been around for 100 years. They do a great job of telling you how successful they are as a business. But if you were to ask me, Moody Nolan, right? So you have those companies that are out there doing the work of demonstrating that there are companies like this that are investable, that have been around for a long time. And the competence level cannot be questioned, right? Competing with some of the biggest companies in their industry. So I think part of the triple aim is, hey, Elio, where are you on this, right? Shouldn't you be part of highlighting these companies and kind of changing the narrative about some of this? So I'm glad that you brought it up. It's a challenge to me as well, because I need to be on that side as well. How do I promote those companies to make it less of a mystery, right? Where are these people? They should be front and center on a platform like this. All right, so let's talk about the mechanics. So essentially, you have these companies. it's a tough thing, right? When you're approaching a founder who has built his company over 12 years and saying, hey, I know you might not be familiar with this, but here's an idea, a new asset class, and a way to make an exit, right? So let's talk about why a founder in that position could benefit, like when you're doing your sales pitch. Let's talk about the mechanics here of private equity.
Yeah, look, for me, first and foremost, I like to listen before I go in and start saying, this is why Fulcrum's so great, right? This is why I'm so great. Like, you don't know me from Adam at this point, right? And so me talking about where I went to school, all the deals I've done in the past, that doesn't matter at that point. Like, you're having this conversation because there's something going on in your life that is making you think about the idea of selling your business, right? So it's my job to figure out what that is first. So when I approach, or when I'm meeting with a founder who's getting ready to contemplate selling his or her business, I am first trying to understand the why. Tell me what's driving you. Is it because you've got a sick wife or husband at home? Is it because you've got some debt that you are worried about covering over the next year? Is it because you've got some big contracts that you don't think you can fulfill without a little bit more capital on the balance sheet and more resources? Is it because you've got some kids that are going off to college and you want to be able to invest some money into their future? I don't know, right? But that's my job to figure out. And so I always start with listening and trying to understand where they are, so then I can meet them where they are at. I think that's so critical. So depending on what the situation is going to drive what part of Fulcrum and what part of my background I'm sharing with you at that point. I'm trying to be relevant to you, because at the beginning, we have to build trust right out of the gate. Because if you don't trust me and I don't trust you, how are we going to negotiate a deal? How are you going to believe that we're trying to be on each other's side? Because more often than not, we're going to work post-transaction together. So if we ruin our relationship before we even get to the closing, it's going to make it really difficult for us to be successful post-transaction. So I think there's a lot more relationship building. There's a lot of trust building. There's a lot of credibility building. Those things have to happen, in my opinion, before you get into the nuts and the bolts of the valuation and the terms of the purchase agreement, et cetera. We're going to get there, right? But let's build trust first. And then after do that, I spend a lot of time learning about their business. Tell me everything you want to tell me, and then I'm going to ask a bunch more questions. And I'm hopefully asking things that you hadn't even really thought about from your business, so that you can see that I'm also thinking very critically about your business. So now you can start to see, oh, they may actually be valuable to me because they just provided me in an hour-long conversation a perspective that I hadn't thought about before, right? I can see how I can start to benefit from this. So that's a lot of it up front for me, from my perspective.
All right, so let's get in behind the curtain, a little family business, a little Black family business. All right, so since Fulcrum is focused on investing in Black-owned, minority-owned companies, do you feel culturally, at the time that somebody approaches you, that you find more companies who were thinking about selling from the outset, meaning built to sell? Or are you finding that a lot of companies are heavily influenced by the circumstance of the day? Because you gave some examples, family member sick, a little bit too much debt, maybe a little bit too much of my network locked up in this business. I need to get some cash off the table. Do you find that a lot of the businesses that you engage in have this idea of an exit at some point built in? Or are you finding, hey, we need to really think about an exit now that this circumstance has come up?
Yeah, more often than not, in our end of the market, it's the latter versus the former. It's reactionary versus planned. And so it also makes our job a little bit more challenging because they weren't thinking about selling. they haven't prepped their business for a sale, which means a lot of the information and analysis that we need to be able to make a sound decision about making the investment hasn't been prepared. Right. So now, again, this goes back to why relationship building is important, because I have to now say, hey, I'm getting ready to give you 300 items that I need to request. It seems like a lot, but I'm going to be right here and I'm going to work with you and I'm going to help you pull some of this stuff together. And this is why I need to do this. Right. And you don't have that trust, that credibility, man, they're going to tell you to go kick rocks. Right. They're going to say, look, my company's great. Why don't you just give me $10 million for it and we can be all good? And everybody's saying, why is it going to take 3 months for us to close this deal? So that's a long time and it can be an arduous process. And our process can be a little bit longer, again, because most of the time the companies haven't been planning for an exit. They've been planning to just kind of keep running their business, waking up every day. And then boom, something happens and it's like, oh, it's triggering an event. I need to figure something out.
Yeah, and additionally, I mean, you have a fiduciary responsibility, no matter how great the company is, to go through that thing with a fine-tooth comb, because on your end, your investors are expecting that level of due diligence. So now let's get into it. You know, you meet this founder, you're building a great relationship with them. You're having discussions around what is it going to take to sell this business. Let's talk about the due diligence piece. What are some critical components that just out of the gate, right, to establish kind of good faith on the part of the founder that they should be coming to the table with? At least I'm prepared with these things. I know due diligence is going to take time, but just readily available, good best practice when it comes to running a company.
Yeah, absolutely. So right off the top, you should hopefully have at your disposal, at your fingertips, at least the last 5 years worth of financial statements. We start with annual, right, to get a high level view. We work our way down to monthlies, right, because we want to see trends in the business, et cetera. You should, and that the financial statements, right, income statement, balance sheet, must have. The cash flow statement is a nice to have, but a lot of times companies don't prepare those the right way. So we oftentimes have to kind of recreate the cash flow statement based off of what we see in the income statement and balance sheet. But you got to at least have that, right? The other thing is the expectation is that you should be able to pull your revenue from your customers, right? So I want to be able to see, revenue by each customer that you have, because I'm looking for concentrations. I'm looking for history to say, are they spending more with you? Are they spending less with you? Because we're going to go into that. That's a basic thing that we're going to tend to ask right out of the gate. We're going to ask about we're going to get an org chart, less so about the names, more so around, is this an organization that seems like it's ready to grow, or are we going to have to hire 3, 4, 5 people because they're missing some key components? Those are important facets. And then I think you have to kind of be able to just tell your story. And what I mean in that is, why did you start the business? What's been your strategy? Where do you think the company could go? And quite honestly, where have you had your challenges? Right? Let's have that conversation. We mix it in with the financial statements and the customer review and your organization review. And from there, we can have a really good initial conversation and figure out kind of quickly, is there something here that we want to go further with?
Yeah, and I think part of knowing and understanding your own story is also knowing and understanding your customer, right? Yeah, I understand the business that I'm in, right? Beyond just selling my product and knowing my business, the industries that I serve, having that knowledge of what's going on in the customer world, how the customer is going to evolve over the next year, 2 years, 3 years. What are the macroeconomic challenges that your customers are facing? And is that evident in the numbers, right? So looking back, doing that historical analysis, if you're a medical supply company, 2020 is going to have a lot of stories from a macro point of view that if you understand your customer industry, macro and micro, you'll be able to talk through those things, and having an investor really look at you and say, wow, this person understands the world beyond their business. They understand their customers. And I think also that accurate forecasting piece, that's something that I'm learning, where you're budgeting out into the future and somebody could really say, wow, they really thought about what's next for this company and they're prepared for bumps in the road. As you're looking at those intangible, I know those numbers are there.
Yeah.
But you're also doing business with the person. What are some of the intangibles that you look for in the founders that you invest in?
Look, I'm always looking for evidence of integrity. I need to feel like I'm working with somebody who is honest and upfront about what's happening. So if I'm looking at your report and I say, oh, I look at this customer, it looks like, they're spending less with you. Tell me what's going on there. That answer, it could go a bunch of different ways, but I will ultimately find out the truth. So if you don't give me the truth then, and I find out later that it was something else other than what you told me, that is going to cause me to have real concern about going into business with you. Because if you think about it, I think I was telling you before we started the session here today that I just did a $20 million deal last week. I can't put $20 million to work with somebody who I fundamentally can't trust. So I will talk with employees when I get a chance, and I'll just be like, hey, so what do you think about such and such? What's it like working here? And I'm listening to how are they treated? What do they say when they feel like there's not a mic in the room? And, do they respect the leadership? Do they feel like they're taken care of? Do they feel like that this is a job that values them as a person and values their families and their things? And I'm looking for those things that don't necessarily come out in a financial statement or something along those lines, but they speak volumes to how that founder is running that company, how they treat their employees. And if you're doing all of those things the right way, then I can feel a lot more comfortable about now going into business with you. And because we're going to be, married for 3 to 5 years after this.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue to the after, right? So we know you get the intro, you build relationships, you do the due diligence, and you scared the people a little bit by talking to their employees. No. If you have integrity, don't be afraid of that, all right? He's going to talk to your employees, fact, right? Because we need to understand this business as a whole, all the components of it. And then you buy, right? So you negotiate some majority stake in the company. After the money, though, what does life look like for the founder?
Yeah, well, I guess a lot of it's going to be, it depends, right? If they're staying involved in the business, and let's assume that this founder is also the person that we want to be the ongoing CEO and executive of the company. What that's going to look like now for that person is they're going to continue to lead that business. However, we set out from the onset to say, we're trying to grow this business. We need to invest in certain things. So that means you have to be open to us rounding out the leadership team. Oftentimes, there is not a credible or qualified CFO in seat or a controller, right? And so we have to get that person first. A lot of times we have a much higher bar for financial reporting and auditing and et cetera that a lot of founders tend to not have, right? So that's one thing. I think we incorporate board meetings. So we're now having board meetings every quarter, and you've got to be able to demonstrate how are we tracking towards our goals, our strategy, our budget. That can be different for a founder, right? Because they were used to not having to report to anybody because it was their business. And so that can be an adjustment for them because now, even though they're still an equity shareholder, even though they're still the CEO of the business, there are other people that they have to report to now and make sure that we're doing things the right way. So that is just a change. That's a big one. More often than not, we tend to upgrade the systems. So whether that's a lot of small businesses are using QuickBooks. QuickBooks is great for small business. It tends not to scale up the way we need it to scale up. So we'll replace that. We're looking at your pricing. We're looking at your sales and marketing strategy. We're looking at your operations. We're looking at your facilities. all of these things are open to be changed or improved upon depending on the scenario. We talked about how do we expand your customer base and those things. So I think what happens is we tend to professionalize businesses more than they had been before. No more, hey, I'm just going to use the business to pay for my daughter's expense, right? No more country club memberships that don't tie to the business. So we pull all of that stuff out and we really turn it into a real business as opposed to a kind of a lifestyle business, right? And I think those types of things can be, again, they can be major changes for a founder to get used to.
Yeah. Now, for a novice like me, when I hear $20 million for majority stake, it sounds almost like it's $20 million to who the founders are. Is that what happens with that money? Or all the things of professionalizing and all of that is some of that money is going towards that? Where does that money go?
Yeah, so this is going to be the other thing that is maybe slightly different in the buyout world versus the venture world. Most of the time when the venture world invests capital, they are investing all of the capital directly onto the balance sheet of the company. And it's meant to help grow the business. Maybe the founders take a little bit of money, but that is generally not the case. In the buyout world, most of the money does end up going to the sellers after we pay off the debt. Any debt that they have on the books already, we tend to do our deals what's called cash-free, debt-free. So they get to keep the cash, they get to, and we pay off the debt, and then what's ever left over goes to them based off of how much they own in the business. Now, we will also build in cash on the balance sheet. It just tends not to be as big of a number as what venture might put in. So in this deal that I just did, we put just under $400,000 of cash directly on the balance sheet of this company. We'll also get a line of credit for the business, probably around $1 million, $1.5 million. So that will also give us some ability. But again, we have a profitable company. So we already know that we're generating cash day one as well. So there's not as much of a need for us to immediately inject so much cash directly onto the balance sheet of the company.
All right. So crazy. Okay. I'm just throwing questions out there like the audience will, right? Because I need to know this as well. So sellers exit, right? Everybody's happy. Champagne glasses for you as well. $20 million deal. Bought this profitable company. Gonna fine tune this thing to take it to the next level. It's cash flowing on day one. Everybody's happy. So are the investors in private equity really then buying that cash flow? Meaning their return on their investment, on that $20 million investment, it's going to pay back over time from that cash flow? Or, again, a novice asking questions here, are you guys looking to grow that business to the next level and then flip it to someone else?
Yeah, so I will personally say I'm not a huge fan of the term flip it.
Okay.
Flip it seems like we're in and out kind of thing. And I think what we do, we spend a substantial amount of time with the companies. But your broader point, though, is a good one. It's situational, but in general, our investors are making the majority of their return when we sell the company. Now, there are situations where companies are just doing so well, they're paying off so much cash, they've paid down all the debt that we will do what's called a dividend recap, right? And we will distribute capital to the investors. And if we do that, our investors love us, right? Because they're already starting to get return on their money and they haven't had to give up any ownership in the process, right? So we still own, 80-90% of the company. But it's doing so well that they're also getting their initial capital out, which then reduces or eliminates their risk of loss, which is a great thing for us to do. But more often than not, we're trying to use that cash flow to help continue to support the growth of the business. And that means we want to keep the cash in the business more often than not.
Yeah. And so who's then that buyer? Are you going back out to other private equity firms who might be looking at deals further along? Maybe you guys are looking at deals, $20 million or less. They're looking at deals $100 million or more. And so you now, having scaled this company to that next level, will go back out to the private equity market, or you might be looking at acquisitions by larger corporations like an Amazon, a Microsoft, or whoever. What is usually that final stop for you or for Fulcrum?
I mean, look, sounds like you got it, right? You got to figure it out. But look, the reality is there's essentially three outcomes when we go to sell. You hit the first two on the head, right? More often than not, it's going to be a private equity firm that has a focus of larger companies than where we are when we get in, right? Second is what we call strategics. So those are the corporations. Those are other companies who said, wow, I wouldn't have bought this company back when they were smaller, but now that you're bigger, it actually makes sense for us to bring you into our fold. So strategics are the next buyer. And then a third option is sometimes the management team will say, you know what? I really like what we're doing here. I'm going to go out and I'm going to raise capital and use some of my own money that I've made, and I'm going to buy back control of the business. And I think from Fulcrum's perspective, we are fine with any of those outcomes as long as we feel like we have gotten the best value for our investors and that we're doing right by the companies that we're selling. Because there are a lot of things to take into consideration. I'll put it like this. If there's one buyer who says, I'm going to give you $100 million and another buyer who's going to give you $90 million, but the $100 million says, but I want to fire 25% of your employee base because I don't feel like we need them, we've got them, or whatever. But the $90 million buyer is saying, hey, I need everybody you got, and this is our plan. Well, we have to really think hard about that, right? Because there are real people on the other end. There are real lives affected. So it's not always just about the money, but money does drive a lot of it. But again, all else being equal, I'm probably going to try to get that 90 million. Can I get you to go up to like 95 or whatever, or something like that? And I might take that deal because I know it's better for the outcome of that team that we just spent the last 5 years helping build something with. And, those people are ultimately going to have Christmas. They got kids, they got families, and all those things. I just believe there has to be some integrity about what we do.
I am ready to have your existential crisis interview when you're going to sell with a company that you've fallen in love with, and all of these factors are at play for you, man. You gotta give me the call. Like, I need to talk to somebody.
You gotta get the first call. Absolutely.
Yeah, of course. Those are good problems to have. That means you would have done a lot of things right. You'd have done right by a lot of people. And that's a great place. I'm sure Fulcrum would want to be making decisions like that about selling companies that they've invested in. All right, folks, listen, I know you're on the edge of your seat because I'm on the edge of my seat. I'm loving this conversation with my guest, Marques Martin of Fulcrum. We're going to take one final break. We'll be back to close this thing out. So stay tuned after these messages. Support for the 614 Startups podcast comes from Nationwide. Nationwide's mission is to protect people, businesses, and futures with extraordinary care. To help fulfill that mission, Nationwide is looking to invest its $350 million venture capital investment fund in insurtechs that will help them create new and exciting products and solutions to meet the needs of their customers. If you're interested in partnering with Nationwide's venture capital team, visit nationwideventures.com to learn more. Again, the website is nationwideventures.com. Nationwide is on your side. Support for the 614 Startups podcast comes from Book and Street. Book and Street provides finance and accounting solutions for startups in the Midwest and beyond. From strategic financial support to bookkeeping and everything in between, they've got your back office covered. Let their experienced team of finance and accounting professionals help your startup get it right from the start. Learn more at bookandstreet.com and set up your free 30-minute consultation with their team today. All right. 614 Startups Nation, we produce instant classics, man. This is an instant classic. My man Marques Martin has given us the 101 and beyond of private equity. So I hope you had your pen and your pencil. You can always re-listen to this because a lot of gems got dropped. So Marques, we're going to wrap this thing up with my final question. how do you get into private equity for somebody out there watching? Maybe somebody at Morehouse, right? Because this is going to go on the Morehouse network. We're going to put it on the email blast. Proud son of Morehouse talking about private equity. Let's say they're in their dorm room, or it's a younger kid in high school counting their money like they used to while they're watching TV. They want to get into private equity. How do you break into private equity, and what does it take to succeed?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I had no idea what the answer to that would have been when I was first in school. So hopefully this is helpful to somebody out there. What I would tell you is the traditional route is you spend 2 years or more at a consulting firm, a strategic management consulting firm, or an investment bank, right? And within the strategic management consulting firm, they'll usually tell you it's kind of Bain, McKinsey, BCG. Those are kind of the biggest feeders from the consulting world. And in investment banking, there's a ton of investment banks, whether you're doing the ones that are on Wall Street or you're doing ones that are more local or regional or things like that. And the reason those two industries tend to be the biggest feeders is because from a consulting standpoint, it's all about problem solving. It's all about being able to do analysis. Those are skill sets that are readily transferable to private equity and what's done. From an investment banking standpoint, kind of same thing. And they spend a lot more time understanding financial analysis, understanding how to build financial statements and things like that. Those are immediately valuable skill sets that are directly applicable to what you do as an analyst in the private equity world. Now, with that being said, those are just the most traditional. It's not their only way of getting there. When I tell people who maybe have already been working and maybe they didn't do consulting or they didn't do investment banking, then what I say is spend time really understanding what type of private equity firm you want to be a part of. Do you want to do venture? Do you want to do buyouts? Do you want to be in healthcare? Do you want to be in manufacturing? Do you want to be in government contracting? Whatever, right? Like figure that out and then make sure that the experience that you're getting right now speaks to that. So if I want to go to a private equity firm that focuses on consumer B2C companies, then if I didn't do investment banking and I didn't do consulting, then I better be working for some top B2C companies, maybe in their financial group or their analytics group or their internal consulting group or something to try to get out. The other thing that people can do then is they can go to business school. And then business school kind of gives you a chance to reset a little bit and then apply again. So I think those are some of the most common ways. And just as a shameless plug, we're currently looking for a new analyst or associate to come join FVLCRUM. So get my information from the 614 team here, and we'd be happy to take a look at folks too.
All right, go ahead and shout it out, man. So if somebody wants to apply or somebody has an intro they want to make, or somebody wants to reach out to you because they want to begin a conversation, build that relationship with you, how do they get a hold of you or FVLCRUM?
Yep. So our website is www.FVLCRUM, and that's FVLCRUM with a V. So FVLCRUM.com. And then my email address is mm@FVLCRUM.com. So you can email me directly. It's always on me. So I'm always checking the email, and I'd be happy to take a look and set up time to speak with people.
All right, Marques, man, thank you so much for that brilliant conversation. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate all the information that you shared. And I appreciate the fact that you chose to locate in Columbus, Ohio. I think we need to start ringing the bell. We need to start screaming from the rooftops that there is another option, right? VC is not the only route. If you're building a profitable company, you should be thinking about an exit early. You should be preparing for those conversations. And when you're ready, you should be calling Marques Martin of FVLCRUM. All right, folks, there you have it. My name is Elio Harmon, your host. Thank you again for joining us. Until next time, peace. That's a wrap, folks. You can find this and all our episodes on our website, 614startups.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and all your favorite podcasting platforms. Don't forget to subscribe and write a review. If you'd like updates sent directly to your inbox, you can sign up for our weekly newsletter on the website. To engage in the 614 Startups community, follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at 614 Startups on all platforms and join the conversation. For sponsorship opportunities and collaborations, email us at info@614startups.com. dividendraport.com.